20,000 years ago, there was no name for this land. No maps, no borders, no idea even that a continent lay waiting on the other side. Just a grassy, wind-scarred plain, stretching farther than anyone alive had ever walked, connecting one world to another. Somewhere out there, in the cold and the silence, a small group of people took a step forward. They didn't know it yet, but that single step would end up populating 2 entire continents. So how did they do it? Who were they? And why, after a century of digging, dating, and debating, are scientists still arguing about the answer? Let's go back to the beginning, to the last ice age, and the greatest migration story never told. Here's the strange part. Every school textbook seems to have a simple answer. Humans walked from Asia to America across a land bridge roughly 13,000 years ago, and that was that. But the deeper archaeologists dig, literally, the more that simple story falls apart. Footprints that shouldn't exist. DNA that tells a different story than the bones. Tools found in places they were never supposed to be. This isn't just a story about the past. It's a story about how we know the past and how one of the biggest scientific mysteries on Earth is still being rewritten, discovery by discovery. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just how humans reached America, but why this question turned into one of the greatest detective stories in science. Let's start where it all began, at the edge of the ice. Around 26,000 years ago, Earth was in the grip of its last great ice age. Glaciers as tall as skyscrapers buried much of North America, Europe, and Asia under solid ice. And here's the part most people never learn in school. All that ice had to come from somewhere. The oceans. As water froze into massive ice sheets, global sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, nearly 400 feet. Coastlines that we know today simply didn't exist. The seafloor became dry land. And in the far north, between what is now Siberia and Alaska, this had an extraordinary effect. A strip of land, later named Beringia, emerged from beneath the sea. At its widest, it wasn't just a narrow bridge, it was over 1,000 kilometers across. Wide enough to hold grasslands, rivers, valleys, an entire landscape hiding in plain sight, connecting 2 continents that we think of today as worlds apart. For a while, Asia and America weren't separate places at all, but land alone doesn't explain a migration. Something, or someone, had to actually walk across it. So who were they? Picture it. Not an army of explorers, not conquerors with a mission, just families, small bands of hunter-gatherers moving the way their ancestors always had, following the animals that kept them alive. Woolly mammoths, steppe bison, enormous herds moving slowly across the grasslands of Beringia. Wherever the herds went, people followed, because in this world, the herd was survival. These people carried stone tools sharpened over generations, sewed animal hides into clothing that could withstand brutal cold, and passed down survival knowledge the only way they could. By telling stories around a fire, there were children in these groups, elders, people who laughed, argued, grieved, and dreamed, just like us. They weren't crossing into the unknown because they were destined for greatness. They were doing what humans have always done, following food, following opportunity, following survival. But somewhere in that slow, generational drift, they crossed a line no human had ever crossed before. They walked into a continent with no other humans in it. Which raises the next question. How, exactly, did they get all the way in? For decades, scientists thought they had the answer. One simple route, the Bering Land Bridge theory. People crossed Beringia on foot, then continued south through the middle of North America to reach the rest of the continent. Simple, clean, case closed. Except there was a problem. At the height of the Ice Age, 2 enormous ice sheets, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran, merged together, sealing off the interior of North America like a wall of ice hundreds of kilometers wide. If people crossed early, that wall would have blocked their path completely. So, how did they get through? This is where things get interesting. Theory 1, the ice-free corridor. As the climate slowly warmed, a narrow gap opened between the 2 ice sheets, a corridor of exposed land. For years, scientists believed this corridor was the route south. But new research raised a problem. The corridor may not have been usable, no plants, no animals, nothing to survive on until after humans were already appearing further south, which meant something didn't add up. Theory 2. The coastal migration route. Instead of walking through the middle of the continent, some scientists argue people moved along the Pacific coastline, using boats, or walking along exposed shorelines and offshore refuges free of ice, slowly making their way south by following the sea. Fish, shellfish, marine mammals. The ocean itself could have fed an entire migration. Here's the honest truth. Scientists don't fully agree yet. Some support the coastal route. Others think multiple routes were used at different times. The evidence keeps shifting, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this such an active area of research today. But whichever path they took, they made it. And what happened next would eventually rewrite everything we thought we knew. Once inside the continent, these early populations didn't stay in one place. Generation by generation, they spread, north to south, coast to coast, eventually reaching all the way to the southern tip of South America. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed they had pinpointed exactly who did this first. The Clovis culture. Named after a site in Clovis, New Mexico, these people left behind a very distinctive style of stone spear point, dated to around 13,000 years ago. For decades, the idea of Clovis first was essentially treated as fact. No humans in America before Clovis. Full stop. Then the ground started giving up secrets that broke the rule completely. In southern Chile, a site called Monte Verde revealed tools, plant remains, even a child's footprint, dated to over 14,000 years ago, older than Clovis, and a world away from where Clovis was found. In Canada's Yukon, the Bluefish Caves produced bone tools that some researchers date back over 20,000 years, suggesting people may have been present in the far north long before Clovis existed. In Oregon, Paisley Caves uncovered preserved human waste. Yes, really, containing ancient DNA over 14,000 years old. And then in the White Sands Desert of New Mexico, scientists found human footprints preserved in ancient mud, dated using seed layers above and below them to an almost unbelievable range, roughly 21,000 to 23,000 years old. If that dating holds up, it means people were in America thousands of years before the ice sheets even opened a path south. Clovis first didn't just get challenged, it got dismantled. So if Clovis wasn't first, who was? And how do we even know for sure? This is where the story stops being just archaeology and starts becoming genetic detective work. Scientists can now extract ancient DNA from bones, teeth, even soil, and compare it to the DNA of people living today, both in Siberia and across the Americas. What they found was remarkable. Nearly all indigenous populations across North and South America trace back to a single ancestral population, one that appears to have been isolated, likely somewhere in Beringia itself, for thousands of years before spreading into the continent. Researchers call this idea the Beringian Standstill hypothesis, the theory that early migrants didn't just pass through Beringia quickly. They may have lived there, isolated for thousands of years, slowly changing genetically before finally moving on. Combine that genetic evidence with footprints preserved in ancient mud, tools buried in caves, and seeds carbon dated to the exact right layer of soil, and a much richer picture starts to emerge. Not one migration, possibly several, not one route, possibly multiple, used at different times by different groups. The story isn't fully solved, but every new discovery adds another piece. And that's what makes this one of the most exciting frontiers in modern science. So if people had already been living across the Americas for over 20,000 years, what does that mean for the story most of us learned about Christopher Columbus in 1492? Here's the important, factual answer. Columbus did not discover an empty land. By the time European ships arrived, millions of indigenous people were already living across North and South America, organized into complex societies, cities, trade networks, and nations with rich cultures and histories stretching back tens of thousands of years. Columbus's voyage still matters historically, not because he was first, but because his arrival permanently connected Europe and the Americas for the first time, setting off centuries of exchange, conflict, and transformation that reshaped the entire world. Two very different, very true facts. The Americas were already home to millions of people, and 1492 marked a turning point in connecting the hemispheres. Understanding both is what gives us the full picture. Step back for a moment and really think about what this journey actually was. No maps, no idea what lay ahead. No guarantee that the next valley, the next horizon, held anything but more cold, more ice, more uncertainty. And yet, generation after generation, families kept moving forward, not chasing glory, but simply living, surviving, following the herds, raising their children, and passing their knowledge to the next generation. By the time it was over, their descendants had reached from the Arctic tundra of Alaska to the windswept plains of Patagonia at the very bottom of South America. 2 continents, thousands of generations. One extraordinary act of human courage, repeated quietly, over and over, by people who never knew they were making history. This is more than a story about the first Americans. It's a story about all of us, about the restless curiosity that has always pushed humanity towards the unknown horizon. Every discovery we've uncovered, every footprint, every strand of ancient DNA, every stone tool pulled carefully from the earth, is a reminder that history isn't fixed. It's still being found. We are, all of us, descendants of people who kept walking forward even when they had every reason to stop. And maybe that's the most human trait of all. If you enjoyed uncovering one of history's greatest mysteries, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more fascinating journeys through our past.